0347 local time, Central Persian Gulf. A surface search radar aboard a Nimitz-class carrier registers an inbound contact at the edge of its outer detection envelope, descending from medium altitude on a vector consistent with a strike profile rather than a surveillance run. The contact is moving fast, low, and committed. Within seconds, the signature is classified. It is not a drone. It is not a commercial track. It is a 40-year-old airframe that should not, by any reasonable assessment, still be flying combat sorties in this corridor. An Iranian F-14 Tomcat, one of the last operational examples in the world, has just released a missile in the general direction of a United States carrier strike group operating in international waters. The visible story writes itself within minutes. A relic of the Shara arms deals turns its weapons on the very Navy that once flew it. Headlines lean on the symbolism. Analysts cycle through the obvious points. The aircraft is old, the missile is older, and the carrier is the most heavily defended vessel on the planet. The interception, when it comes, will look almost routine, but that is the surface reading. The real story is not the missile. It is what the missile was meant to reveal. To understand what actually happened in that narrow window over the Gulf, you have to look past the launch itself and into the architecture surrounding it, because nothing about this engagement was accidental. Nothing about the timing was coincidental. And the U.S. Navy's response, when it unfolded, did not target only the aircraft that fired. It targeted the system behind it. The carrier in question sits at the center of a strike group built around layered defense. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers forward the formation, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser anchoring the air defense picture, a fast-attack submarine somewhere beneath the thermocline, an embarked air wing of roughly 60 fixed-wing aircraft, including F divided by -18E divided by F Super Hornets, A, 18G Growlers, E-2D Hawkeyes, and the rotary assets that knit the bubble together. The outer ring of the air defense envelope extends well past 100 nautical miles. The inner ring is measured in seconds of reaction time, not miles. The Iranian F-14, by contrast, is a museum piece kept alive through 3 decades of sanctions, cannibalized parts, and improvised engineering. Its AWG-9 radar, once the most advanced airborne fire control system in the world, has been retrofitted, rebuilt, and partially replaced with indigenous components. Its AIM-54 Phoenix missiles, the long-range fleet defense weapon the Tomcat was originally designed to carry, have been refurbished domestically under the name Faker 90. Range, on paper, exceeds 100 kilometers. In practice, the seeker reliability, the propellant integrity, and the mid-course guidance link are all open questions. A single F-14 launching a single missile at a U.S. carrier is not a credible strike. It is barely a credible threat. So why launch at all? That is the question that should sit at the center of every serious assessment of this event, because the Iranian Air Force does not have F-14s to spare. Each remaining airframe is a strategic asset. Each Faker 90 is a limited inventory item. Burning one of each on an engagement with near zero probability of kill is not the behavior of a desperate force lashing out. It is the behavior of a force probing. What the missile was really doing was generating data. When that weapon left the rail, every radar in the strike group lit up. Every mission's control posture broke. Every electronic warfare suite on every escort transitioned through its threat response cycle. The Aegis combat system on the cruiser cued the spy, one array into a specific tracking mode. The E-2D orbiting at altitude pushed track data through cooperative engagement capability links. The Growlers, if airborne, opened their receivers across the relevant spectrum. The submarine below maintained silence, but its passive sensors logged the surface acoustic signature of the entire formation as it accelerated and maneuvered. Every one of those emissions is a fingerprint, and every fingerprint can be collected. This is where the visible layer of the engagement separates from the hidden one. The F-14 was not the weapon. The F-14 was the trigger. The real collection platforms were somewhere else entirely. A Simorgh-class intelligence vessel loitering near the strait. A network of coastal Elent sites along the southern Iranian coast. Possibly a high-altitude drone operating beyond the engagement radius. Possibly a partner nation signals platform sharing data through indirect channels. The launch was the stimulus. The response was the data. Iran has been building this kind of asymmetric intelligence architecture for 2 decades. It cannot match the U.S. Navy ship for ship, aircraft for aircraft, or missile for missile. It does not try. Instead, it invests in the one domain where geography and patience give it leverage. The Gulf is narrow. The Strait is narrower. A carrier strike group operating in those waters is operating inside the engagement envelope of land-based systems that never have to move, never have to refuel, and never have to expose themselves until the moment of decision. That is the structural problem facing the U.S. Navy in this theater, and it has been the structural problem for a long time. The carrier is the most powerful conventional platform ever built. It is also, in confined waters, a target rich in signature and constrained in maneuver. The Strait of Hormuz at its narrowest is 21 nautical miles wide. The shipping lanes within it are 6. A Nimitz-class carrier displaces over 100,000 tons and requires room to turn, room to launch, room to recover aircraft into the wind. Inside that geography, every minute of operation generates exploitable signature. The cost exchange tells the rest of the story. A single Faker, 90, even at full production cost, runs a fraction of the price of one SM-6 interceptor. An anti-ship ballistic missile fired from a hardened coastal site costs less than the rotary wing asset that might attempt to localize its launcher. A swarm of small fast attack craft, each carrying a single anti-ship missile, can saturate a defensive envelope at a cost a defender cannot match indefinitely. The math does not favor the larger force in a sustained engagement inside this geography. It favors a force that can absorb losses and keep generating sorties from dispersed, hardened, redundant infrastructure. This is the equation every carrier strike group commander operating in the Gulf understands before the first aircraft launches. And this is the equation the F-14 was designed to test. What the launch was probing was not whether the carrier could defend itself. Everyone in the chain already knows the answer to that. What was probing was the timing of the response, the depth of the layered defense, the exact moment at which the strike group transitions from passive monitoring to active engagement, the exact emissions profile of each escort during that transition, the exact handoff between the E-2D and the surface combatants, the exact reaction posture of the air wing. Because in a real war, that timing is everything. The U.S. Navy response, when it came, reflected an understanding of exactly what had just occurred. The missile was engaged and destroyed well outside the inner defensive ring. That part was predictable. What followed was not. Within minutes, a flight of Super Hornets repositioned to establish a combat air patrol along a vector that did not match the F-14's egress route. A Growler shifted its orbit. The cruiser's emissions profile changed in a way that would frustrate any post-event analysis attempting to reconstruct the engagement geometry. The submarine, wherever it was, did not surface, did not transmit, and did not reveal itself. That silence is its own response. And then, hours later, a separate event occurred that received almost no public attention. A coastal radar site on the Iranian side of the Gulf experienced what was officially described as a technical malfunction. A communications relay tied to the Revolutionary Guard Naval Command went offline. A small fast attack craft formation that had been shadowing the strike group from a distance broke off and returned to port. None of these events was attributed publicly to the United States. None of them needed to be. The message was delivered in a language both sides understand. The man who would have been reading the data on the U.S. side is not named in any press release, but his function is well established. A carrier strike group has an air defense commander, typically embarked on the Aegis cruiser, responsible for the integrated air picture across the entire formation. That officer's job in the moments after the launch was not to win the engagement. The engagement was already won the instant the missile was tracked. His job was to control the response in a way that revealed as little as possible while collecting as much as possible. The American intelligence community wants Iranian fingerprints just as badly as the Iranians want American ones. The difference is that the Americans had not just expended a non-replaceable airframe to get them. Somewhere in the strike group, an electronic warfare specialist with years of experience reading Iranian emissions was watching the same screens. He would have noticed what most observers would miss. The F-14's radar emissions during the engagement did not match the original AWG-9 signature, the pulse repetition frequency, the scan pattern, the sideload behavior. All of it indicated a heavily modified system. That, too, is intelligence. Iran has been quietly upgrading the radars on its surviving Tomcats, using a combination of domestic components and parts acquired through gray market channels. Confirming the operational status of those upgrades is worth, in pure intelligence terms, considerably more than the cost of a single SM-2. That is the hidden variable in this engagement. Both sides were collecting. Both sides knew the other was collecting. The launch was not a failed strike. It was a transaction. But transactions in this theater carry escalation risk that does not show up in immediate accounting, because every probe of this kind builds a more complete picture of the adversary's defensive architecture, and every more complete picture shortens the time required to plan an actual strike. The F-14 launch, viewed in isolation, is a minor incident, viewed as one data point in a sustained intelligence campaign stretching back years. It is a contribution to a strike plan that may or may not ever be executed. The strike plan exists. It is updated continuously. It is informed by every engagement, every transit, every emission, every movement of every U.S. asset through the Gulf. That is the visible layer. The real pressure sits underneath it. The hidden variable is not the F-14. It is the inventory of anti-ship ballistic missiles and cruise missiles dispersed across hardened sites along the Iranian coast. It is a network of small, fast-attack craft hidden in coves and inlets along a coastline too long to monitor continuously. It is a submarine force, small but operating in waters shallow enough to mask its movements from most detection methods. It is the integrated air defense network that has been quietly improving for a decade. And it is a doctrine that has been written, rehearsed, and refined to use all of those assets in a coordinated saturation attack against exactly the kind of formation that was operating in the Gulf that morning. Whether that doctrine is ever executed is a political question, not a military one. The military question is whether the United States can defend against it if it is. And the honest answer, the answer that every strike group commander operating in those waters carries with him, is that defense in its geography is a probability problem, not a certainty. A carrier strike group can defeat a saturation attack. It can also be overwhelmed by one if the numbers, the timing, and the geometry align against it. The defensive bubble is finite. The interceptor magazines are finite. The reaction time inside the Gulf is measured in seconds, not minutes. Every additional vector the attacker can generate forces a defender to spread coverage thinner. At some point, the math breaks. The F-14 launch was a reminder that the math is being calculated on both sides every single day. The U.S. Navy response was a reminder that the math is also being shaped in ways that are not always visible from the surface. That changed the equation. In the days that followed the engagement, the carrier strike group continued its operations in the Gulf without visible disruption. Aircraft launched and recovered on schedule. Escorts maintained their stations. Public statements emphasized the routine nature of the intercept and the professionalism of the response. None of that was inaccurate. It was also not the full story. The full story is that an aging fighter, flown by a service that should not have been able to keep it airborne, fired a missile that had almost no chance of hitting its target, and in doing so contributed to an intelligence picture that both sides will use to plan operations they hope never to execute. The carrier was not in danger. The strike group was not in danger. But the larger contest, the one that does not end with single intercept, moved forward by a small and measurable increment. That is how this theater works. Not in single decisive battles, in accumulations, in probes, in the slow construction of mutual understanding about exactly where each side's strengths end and each side's vulnerabilities begin. The F-14 will fly again. The Faker 90 will be rebuilt and redeployed. The carrier will continue its rotation through the Gulf, eventually replaced by another carrier, which will face the same geometry, the same coastline, the same accumulating intelligence file. The architecture of the contest does not change with any single engagement. It only deepens. What matters is not what was already visible on the radar that morning. It is what arrives next. And what arrives next is being shaped, right now, by every probe, every emission, every silence, and every response in a theater where the visible layer has never been the real story. If this kind of strategic analysis is what you came here for, consider subscribing for more deep operational breakdowns of events that shape the balance of power beneath the headlines. The next briefing is already in motion,